I was standing outside the storage room at the Portland Convention Center with Mark's coat over my arm when I heard my name spoken like a problem. I had come early because he texted that he needed me to look over a tenant notice before dinner. Another small rescue made to sound casual. Inside, Elise Hart asked how much longer she was supposed to stand outside his life. And Mark answered, "Not tonight." Allison still keeps everything from turning into a mess. For years, I thought my husband regretted marrying me because he corrected every small thing I touched. But that sentence landed colder than regret because it proved he knew exactly what I was worth. The hallway smelled like floor polish and old coffee, and I stared at the public shift calendar beside the door because my hands needed somewhere steady. Elise's name sat under the cleanest event blocks, the easy receptions and early finishes, each one approved in Mark's square handwriting. My phone was still lit with his message asking me to come early, and the tenant notice under my arm no longer felt like a favor. Pause 4S. He had called his wife in to fix his work, while promising another woman a future that looked clean from the outside. Elise said, "You keep saying she understands." And Mark replied, "She understands enough," with the same calm voice he used at home when telling me I had put a receipt in the wrong drawer. I did not open the door, and I did not make the sound people expect a wife to make when her marriage changes shape behind a wall. I stood there with his coat, the unsigned notice, and the calendar that made Elise look less hidden than I had ever been allowed to feel. The worst part was not that Mark wanted someone else. It was that he still needed me close enough to keep his life clean while he explained me away as a detail already handled. When the door finally clicked, I stepped back toward the lobby before he could see my face, and for the first time, I did not wonder whether he regretted marrying me. Before that night at the convention center, I had spent years explaining Mark Brenner in ways that made staying feel reasonable. He never yelled, never called me useless, never embarrassed me, and that made the hurt harder to name. His disappointment came in clean corrections, slipped into ordinary hours before I could decide whether I had a right to feel wounded. I told myself he was practical, a man trained by work to notice what others missed. I scheduled the oil change for his truck because he had meetings all afternoon, and he came home asking why I had not chosen the closer garage after a long day at the college. I made dinner and watched him taste it with the pause I knew. "It's good, but next time maybe keep the sauce on the side," he murmured, and I nodded like that note had not landed on top of 50 others. When he asked me to polish an email, he thanked me by pointing at one extra comma while coffee cooled beside my hand. None of it sounded serious enough when I tried to explain it to Dana Pike over coffee after work, which was why I almost never did. Dana managed customer service for an insurance office, so she knew the difference between a complaint and a person shrinking under tiny corrections. She laughed about a woman whose husband posted birthday captions online, then asked when Mark had last praised me where I could hear it. I had no answer. Only the memory of receipts, sauce, commas, appointments, and every small thing I forgot. Dana did not tell me to leave him, and she did not call him a monster, because monsters are easier to recognize than men who make you feel unfinished. She stirred her coffee and said being trusted to fix everything can still leave you starving for one decent sentence. I laughed because I wanted the moment harmless, but the sound came out thin enough for both of us to hear. Back then, I still believed my marriage was made of silence, not secrets. And the worst thing Mark had done was forget to tell me I mattered. I went to the convention center because Mark made it sound small, almost married in its ordinary inconvenience. He texted that a tenant notice had the wrong tone, and since we were meeting his mother for dinner afterward, could I come early and read it? I stood in the lobby with my work bag on my shoulder, telling myself this was what spouses did. The strange part was how natural it felt to be useful to him, even when useful had started to feel like the only part of me he trusted. Grant Doyle recognized me before Mark came out, and his face opened with a warmth I had not expected. "You're Allison Reed," he said, like my name had been passed around that building before my shoes touched the floor. I smiled carefully and asked if we had met, but he shook his head and said, "Mark talked about me all the time." Another employee paused near the reception desk, laughed, and added that if Allison worked there, half their correction meetings would disappear because Mark always claimed I could spot a problem in 5 minutes. I stood with the tenant notice under my arm, trying to match that version of Mark with the man who noticed every missing receipt at home. Grant leaned against the counter and said Mark called me the calmest person he knew, the one who could read 2 paragraphs and find the sentence everyone else was afraid to touch. "He says that?" I managed. And Grant smiled like the answer was obvious. "So much we figured you were tired of hearing it." I was not tired of hearing it, because I had never heard it from Mark at all. By the time Mark stepped out, the lobby felt brighter and meaner at the same time. He handed me the notice, kissed my cheek like nothing was strange, then glanced down and brushed at my sleeve. "You've got a thread there," he murmured, and the small correction landed on every compliment he had given away to strangers. I looked at the paper in my hand, then at the people who thought I already knew how proud he was, and felt something inside me tilt without making a sound. Dinner with Marcy Brenner should have softened the day, and for a while it almost did. Mark's mother lived in a quiet duplex with herb pots along the kitchen window, and she greeted me like I was still the best decision her son had made. Mark stepped out to check the porch light after dessert, because of course he noticed the flicker first. I stayed at the sink drying plates, still hearing Grant in the lobby, still feeling the thread Mark brushed from my sleeve. I did not plan to ask, but the question came out while Marcy handed me another plate. Has Mark always been the kind of man who can say good things everywhere except in front of the person who needs them? Her hands slowed, and for a second I thought I had been unfair. But then she gave a tired little smile. "His father was that way," she answered, soft enough that it felt more like memory than defense. She told me her husband could tell a neighbor she was the smartest woman in the county, then come inside and remind her the back door was not latched. He could admire a meal and still mention the potatoes needed another minute, believing admiration counted because he felt it. I wanted that explanation to comfort me because it made Mark sound inherited instead of careless. Marcy touched my wrist and said, "That boy is proud of you, Allison, even if he has no idea how to say it right." I almost let myself believe her, until she added that Mark had been under pressure, preparing for a private stage, and had told her not to worry because I understood. The plate in my hand stopped against the towel, and the kitchen noise thinned until I heard the porch light clicking outside. "He told you I understood?" I asked, and Marcy looked up too quickly, the smile leaving her face as she whispered, "I thought you two had talked." That was when the evening changed, because silence could explain a man who failed to praise his wife, but not him using my name to make a lie sound settled. I did not confront Mark that night, because Marcy's face had given me something stronger than suspicion and weaker than proof. I went home, set my purse by the door, and listened to him ask whether I had moved the laundry. The old version of me would have apologized before checking the machine. Instead, I heard Marcy's careful phrase again, and understood a lie could wear the same clean shirt as a habit. Over the next few days, I only looked at things that already belonged in my life. Our shared calendar showed the late nights Mark had called tenant walkthroughs, each one beside a reception where Elise Hart's name appeared on the public schedule. The emails he had copied me on, asking me to soften language for renters or fix an announcement, carried those same dates. When I searched my own messages, I found his small requests stacked together. "Read this before dinner. Check this wording. Don't mention this to Mom yet." None of it was stolen. None of it was guessed, and that made it harder for him to call it imagination. I met Dana Pike at a corner table before work, and she watched me slide printed pages from a folder without touching them too fast. She did not tell me to spy, and she did not feed me the kind of anger that burns the woman holding it. "Keep it clean," she said, tapping one page with her nail, because that is the word he keeps hiding behind. I told her Elise's name showed up every time Mark stayed late. And Dana only asked who benefited when I stayed useful, and Elise stayed patient. That question followed me harder than any accusation. Mark had used me twice. Once at home as the person who kept his life from fraying, and once outside it as the wife who supposedly understood enough to stay quiet. By then, the convention center no longer felt like his workplace in my mind. It felt like the place where his two versions of me had almost met. When his text came a few days later asking me to come early before dinner because a tenant notice needed one quick read, I stared at the screen until it dimmed. Then I picked up my keys. Because this time, I was not going there to help him. I arrived early enough to see Mark's coat hanging outside the storage room, the same one he had asked me to bring from the car because he forgot it again. The tenant notice was folded in my hand, and I was halfway toward the door when Elise Hart's voice came through the gap. I am tired of being the woman who waits while Allison keeps the real parts of your life running, she said. Not loud, not dramatic, just worn down enough to sound honest. My name stopped me harder than any locked door could have. Mark answered with a sigh I knew too well. The one he used before correcting something he thought should have been obvious. Allison is good at those things, he said, and the words should have comforted me. Except he kept going. She sees problems before they become problems. And if I handle this wrong, my mother, the office, everyone will think I'm the guy who left his wife for someone who works under him. Elise went quiet for one breath, then asked, So do you love me? Or do you just love how this looks when no one can see it? He did not say love. He said timing, pressure, optics, and clean. The same word Dana had underlined with her fingernail over coffee. He said Allison understood enough, and Elise cut him off with a bitter little laugh. No. You keep saying she understands because it makes you feel less guilty about never telling her. Standing there with the notice he wanted me to fix, I understood the shape of it at last. Mark had not failed to see my value. He had seen it clearly enough to build his comfort on top of it, while offering someone else the part of himself that still wanted applause. Elise was not the simple enemy I had imagined during the drive over. She sounded angry, but not triumphant, because she was hearing herself become another tool in Mark's careful life. I'm not your future if your wife is still your safety net, she said, and something in me went still instead of breaking. I looked at the public shift calendar beside the hall, at Elise's name tucked into the easy event blocks Mark approved, then at his text asking me to come early for one quick read. When the door handle moved, I stepped back toward the lobby with the paper untouched, because this time I was not there to make his words cleaner. I left the convention center before Mark could hand me the notice again, and by the time I reached our apartment, I knew what belonged on the kitchen table. I did not post anything, call everyone, or give him a scene he could use later. I laid out what he had given me himself, his text asking me to come early, the emails he wanted polished, the shared calendar, Marcy's words, and the schedule showing Elise Hart under blocks he approved. When Mark walked in and saw the papers, his first breath sounded less like surprise than calculation. He tried to make it smaller before he even took off his coat, calling it complicated and personal while his eyes moved from the calendar to the message thread. Personal ended when you used my name to make your mother think I understood, I said, keeping my hands flat because they wanted to shake. He said Elise had nothing to do with our marriage, and I slid the schedule closer. The receptions and early finishes marked beside her name. If you can affect her work schedule, this stopped being only our marriage the moment you kept that relationship quiet. Mark looked at the pages like they had betrayed him by staying still. He said I was turning a private mistake into something ugly, but the evidence did not need my anger to hold its shape. Marcy came because I asked her to hear where her name had been used, and she did not soften him into family habit. She looked at Mark across our table and said, Your father was bad with praise, but he never made me a cover story. And that was the first consequence I saw reach his face. Dana helped me write the message to HR the next morning, clean enough that no one could call it concern. It did not accuse Mark of being a bad husband. It stated that a scheduling manager appeared to have an undisclosed personal relationship with an employee whose assignments he could influence. Grant confirmed the reporting structure, and Mark was pulled back from any schedule involving Elise while the review started. Elise was moved to another team, and the office that once treated Mark like the man who fixed every loose edge began looking at him like one. Mark did not lose everything, because real life rarely cleans a mess that neatly. What he lost was the privilege of telling it in his own careful language. At work, every schedule involving Elise Hart had to pass through someone else, and every calm explanation he gave was measured against the emails, the calendar, and the reporting line Grant Doyle confirmed. The man who used to correct every loose edge became the reason other people checked the edges twice. Elise was moved away from his approval chain, and the easy event blocks that once made her look favored stopped appearing under Mark's handwriting. She did not call me, and I did not need her apology to understand what she had finally seen. Mark had not chosen her as a future. He had chosen a place where he could feel wanted, while his wife still kept his real life from falling apart. When she told him, "I was never your future if she was still your safety net," he had no clean answer left. Marcy stopped explaining him as a Brenner man who loved badly but meant well. She came by once with a box of dishes I had left behind, and her face carried the kind of sadness that did not ask me to comfort it. "Loving quietly is not the same as lying quietly," she told me, and I believed she was saying it to both of us. For the first time since I married Mark, his mother did not hand me a reason to understand him. I moved into a small apartment near the college and handled the separation through the ordinary channels people use when life breaks without becoming a headline. There were forms, appointments, divided furniture, and conversations with a family lawyer who cared about dates more than heartbreak. Dana sat on my floor while I unpacked, passing me plates without trying to turn my calm into a performance. I wrote things I chose to keep on a small box and put my documents inside it. Because Mark had once corrected me for keeping receipts in the wrong drawer. The last time Mark texted, he wrote that he never meant to make me feel unseen. I read it beside a stack of student files I had finished before dinner, and felt no need to teach him where the sentence had arrived too late. For years, I thought my husband regretted marrying me because he only saw what needed fixing. The truth was worse and finally freeing. He saw my worth clearly, and I stopped letting him use it without loving me right. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. Some peace does not arrive because someone finally chooses you loudly. It arrives when you stop begging them to see what was already true. I hope you keep the part of your life that lets you breathe easier.